Okay. All right. Thank you all for coming. We'll go ahead and get started today. On behalf of Georgia State University's Perimeter College, welcome to our program today. It's part of the Mario A.J. Bennekin Black History Symposium. Our overall symposium theme this year is The Black History Movement Turns 100, Rooted in Legacy, Growing Through Education. This is the 100th anniversary of the first, oops, I got the wrong glasses here. Let me get my glasses up. Of the first formal celebration of Black History. Black History Week, as it was in the 1920s, when the great historian Carter G. Woodson created this movement. We have certainly seen some good times and some ups and downs, some bad times as well since then. And now I think we need this formal celebration of Black history more than ever. So it's been one of the great honors of my professional career to have been involved with the Bennekin Symposium since about 2020, when we sort of did it informally. And some folks remember that. So we're really glad you could join us. I see many of my students here are here today, so thank you all so much for coming, but most of you probably don't know who I am. So I'm Robert Woodrum, and I teach history here at the Clarkston campus. And I'm going to serve as the facilitator for today's presentation, which is entitled, What Can We Learn? Black Women's Welfare Rights in New Orleans. Now, before I introduce our speaker, I just want to take care of a couple of housekeeping sort of items. I encourage everybody to visit the Bennekin Symposium website. It's got a lot of information about other events that are going on all over our different campuses, on this campus, Clarkston, as well. Now, while you're there, you can help us out. When you go to the website, you'll see a little button and you can make a donation. Any donation will help. It will help us continue to do this kind of work. And, Black history is so much more important now than I think ever before. Regarding our presentation today, we're going to have a discussion and then we'll have a Q&A session. And those of you here in the audience, I'll have a microphone and I'll kind of come around and give you the microphone. You can ask your question to our speaker. And those of you on WebEx, you can just type a question into the chat, and our monitor, Will Simpson, is going to be keeping an eye on that and compile some of the questions, and we'll try to get your question answered by the speaker. So before we begin, I just want to thank a couple of people. First, I would like to thank Kimberly Bennekin and the Bennekin family for creating this symposium and for all their support for what we've been doing here. This is such a wonderful tribute to Mario Bennekin, who I worked for up at the Dunwoody campus. And Mario was sort of a mentor to me when I started at Perimeter, and also very much of a friend. And I think the family has done such good work by preserving his memory and also helping us.
Okay, so
important and vibrant program. I think we need to mute somebody.
did anyone attend the virtually attend the thing on Monday?
Sorry,
I'm registered, but it didn't let me attend it.
It did?
It kept, like, every time
I
I started up, it brought me back to the.
Sean, can you hear me? Can you mute Sean? Let's see if it's Sean. No. Okay. There we go. I'm unmuted. Let me start sharing again. Hold on. All right. All right. Okay. Anyway, so we're back to where we need to be. Okay. I was doing the thank you. So again, the Bennekin family has done such good work by preserving his memory and helping us build this important symposium. So I'd also like to thank our Dean, Barbara Johnson, for her strong support for what we do at the Bennekin Symposium. She's been a strong supporter ever since she came to our college. And I'd also like to thank Will Simpson, who's going to be monitoring the chat, who's the chairman of our History, Political Science, and Africana Studies Department, and I've known Will for probably 30 years, so I greatly appreciate his support for what we do here at Clarkson and with the Bennekin Symposium. I'd like to thank Mark Zayak, who couldn't be here today, who is my direct chair for the Clarkson campus, who is also a strong supporter, but fell ill this morning and couldn't attend. And I also need to mention Sally Robertson, who heads up the Bennekin Organizing Committee. She just makes our work so much easier because of her positive support for what we're doing. And one other group of people, the folks with our technology office who keep this running, our facilities department, the event staff, the person with social media who's here taking social media. These folks do a lot of the work at the university. You really don't see sometimes how much work they do, but without them, we couldn't have our classes. And it's just really important to understand it's the workers on the campus that make this place go. There's one other thing I would like to just mention before we get started, and that is our Africana Studies Department. Very quickly, since this is the Mario A.J. Bennekin Symposium on Black History, I want to take a minute to just talk about our program. At Perimeter College, we have a pathway in Africana Studies. A lot of people don't know that. We also, at the downtown campus, offer a BA in Africana Studies, a Master of Arts in Africana Studies, and a graduate certificate in Africana Studies. And if you're an undergraduate, which most of you are, you can actually minor when you get downtown in Africana Studies if you'd like to do that. So we have a lot of different ways to engage with this program. And it's a really vibrant department with dynamic faculty who offer really interesting and important classes. If any of you saw the keynote speaker, Maurice Hodson, on Monday, you know the quality of the faculty that Africana Studies has. And so I just encourage you to investigate Africana Studies and consider taking some classes or even majoring in it. So I did want to say that. So now let me introduce today's speaker, and this is a real pleasure for me. Erlene Ellis is a new PhD student in the Department of History at the University of Georgia. They recently completed their History MA at the University of New Orleans and received their Bachelor's in History and Cultural Studies in 2023 from Chatham University in Pittsburgh. Erlene is a scholar of Black women's labor history, U.S. social welfare, and low-wage care work organizing. Erlene's exciting work spans a lot of different fields in history: Black women's labor history, social welfare and care organizing in the United States, and even global studies. They received departmental honors at the University of New Orleans for their work in African American history by aiding in the curation of the Don't Stand Alone Black Labor Organizing in New Orleans public history exhibit. They have presented at conferences such as the Association of Black Women Historians, the Labor and Working Class History Association, the Southern Labor Studies Association, which is where I saw kind of a version of the presentation we're going to see today. And several labor historians who have been around for a long time just really said that it was the best panel they'd ever seen, and Erlene was really the reason for that. So immediately started thinking about getting Erlene to talk with y'all. That would be really great. And she's also spoken at the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Pursuing the doctoral degree in history at UGA will facilitate continued research surrounding their MA thesis titled Rest If You Must, But Don't Quit: Black Women's Work and Welfare in the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization, 1970s to 1990s. Erlene aims to fully flesh out connections between labor organizing and social mobilization for Black and brown women in the Southern United States in the context of global oppression of subaltern labor. And as we've seen in recent years and even in recent months, this type of organizing is just vitally important in America right now. So please join me in welcoming Erlene to Georgia Perimeter College.
Thank you, Robert. That was a wonderful introduction. I want to thank everyone for coming today and for the invitation to talk to you all about my master's thesis research. This has been really important. This work is very important to me. And so I'm just really excited to be able to share it with all of you. And so we'll get started. From 1990 to 1998, small but important graduation ceremonies took place in New Orleans every 5 weeks. Hundreds of Black welfare mothers walked across the same stage wearing traditional African caps and gowns. These women, they received a certificate, gave a short speech on what welfare rights meant to them. These women were not graduating from school, but from a welfare education program called Instill I Rise. Graduates went on to test for their general education degree, attend institutions of higher education, and obtain jobs in the city through connections that they made during this program. Run by the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization and its executive director, Miss Viola Washington, the Instill I Rise program provided critical education to its welfare recipient students while imparting them with a sense of Black pride and community connection. On October 26, 1996, at Gallier Hall on St. Charles Street in New Orleans, there was another type of welfare ceremony. At this meeting, welfare rights activists from New York to California celebrated not just Black welfare mothers who had graduated from the program, but also the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization's 16-year anniversary. At both the Instill I Rise graduations and this 1996 banquet, Black welfare mothers represented themselves as political actors and community members. Their joy and pride was at the forefront of both events. Showcasing a public reclamation of dignity, their stories refute narratives of welfare dependency. At these events, welfare recipients were celebrated in front of their families, spiritual leaders, musical guests, local and national activists, and local politicians. On screen, you can see is an admit one ticket used for the anniversary banquet in 1996. And I hope by understanding how these welfare graduations happened and the impact they had will help us learn something today. So here's kind of what we'll go through today. So first, I want to guide you through how I decided and became interested in studying the history of welfare rights organizing. I also want to talk about how what welfare rights is, and important historical events that will help you understand what welfare rights meant at this time for Black women in Louisiana, and connecting it to other social justice movements. We will trace the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization's development from the 1980s through the 1990s, highlighting their evolving strategies in response to welfare reform. Through the Instill I Rise program, which was the organization's signature welfare education and empowerment program, we will also learn how Miss Viola Washington, the executive director, who had been a welfare recipient herself and understood the challenges it posed for Black women in New Orleans, illustrate the conditions and traditions that shaped the women who would found the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization. So the research process. I studied history and cultural studies in an undergrad program. And so when I got to the master's program in New Orleans, I had to think about what my final thesis would be. I had a particular interest in Black women-led organizations around their work. I had gotten involved myself in labor organizing through Starbucks Workers United. And so I began to think about how Black women in the past had organized their own labor. In talking with my mother and family members about this interest, I learned about how my grandmother and my mother had both done domestic work. And domestic work was something that Black women had organized around, especially in the South, for a long time. And so a project that I was working on in New Orleans, the Don't Stand Alone Black Labor exhibit, directly connected me to that domestic worker organizing history through the black and white photo that you see here. This is the conference National Conference of Household Workers that took place in the 1970s. But we really had no idea who these women were, how this conference happened, or why it happened in New Orleans in the first place. And so through an oral history interview, which are interviews designed to preserve firsthand memories, experiences, perspectives, hear about historical processes and events, the interviews in newspapers pointed to domestic workers in the 1970s creating a organization called the National Council on Household Employment. And Black women in New Orleans had been a part of this organizing. And so the oral history interview that I did was wonderful for the project, but I needed more. I wanted to know more about then what happened after that. And so a name that came up in the oral history interview was Ethel Warren. Now, Ethel Warren, who had been a part of the household workers, had a daughter named Vera Warren. And I knew Miss Vera because she ran the local community bookstore, that's what it was called, in the Treme neighborhood in New Orleans. Now, this community bookstore was full of Black and African diaspora books, clothing, music, whatever you were looking for, Miss Vera had it. And so I went to this bookstore and I began asking Miss Vera questions. I was like, oh, did you know that your mom had been involved in domestic worker organizing? And could you tell me any more about Black women organizing in the community? And Miss Vera pointed me to the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization. She was able to point out to me this planter that you see here that had a woman's name on it, Miss Viola Washington. Now, I want you to, I know we're talking about New Orleans, so I have to say that it is known for its Gulf South Cajun and Creole culture, the food, but especially the jazz music. But something that I was noticing as I was living there, I was, going to the grocery store, you're walking in these neighborhoods and you're seeing remnants of a history of strong community organizing. And so when I brought this up to Miss Vera at the bookstore, she was like, hold on a second. And she picked up her phone and she called Miss Viola Washington for me. And she told Miss Viola Washington that I was new to town, that I was doing history research, that I wanted to know more about her community organizing that had taken place. And I was then able to get Miss Viola Washington's number, and I was able to go to her house, and through multiple conversations, I was able to also do an oral history interview with her. And now this took work. This took a lot of work, as all really good research does, especially relationship work. Telling Miss Viola why I wanted to talk to her, what I was going to do with the research, why did I care so much? Where are you from? Because you're definitely not from New Orleans. Telling her about my own family history and why I was interested in learning from her. And that I would hopefully be able to help other people learn from her as well. And so her interview helped me make some really important historical connections about welfare. So, the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 aimed at reducing poverty. This was a federal initiative that emerged in response to insights of social scientists and primarily activists who highlighted the systemic barriers faced by impoverished communities, as well as the persistent existence of poverty during a time where the federal economy was good. And so the Economic Opportunity Act poured $947 million into job training, youth employment, adult education, rural economic development, services for migrant farm workers, and also legal services. And then through the Office of Economic Opportunity, the federal government would help to coordinate federal poverty programs with state and local groups. And so these groups would be called community action programs that were put in place across the United States with the goal of maximum participation of the poor. And so I think this is really important because this is in conjunction with the economic justice movement of the civil rights movement. And so I have a quote on screen from a Alabama activist, Ezra Cunningham, who really hit the nail on the head, saying that you can't eat freedom. And a ballot, so the ability to vote, is not to be confused with a dollar bill. So even though a lot of people had gained civil rights and voting rights, they still were not, they still did not have access to economic opportunity in the same ways. And so that's what this act was seeking to remediate. And so an example of an economic opportunity program is the Memphis Area Project South in Tennessee. And so this OEO funded program was created with neighborhood aides in Memphis and Black women who were neighborhood aides that cared for children. And so in conjunction with a local St. Jude hospital, these women were acutely aware of the malnutrition that was occurring within their communities, especially when it came to mothers and children. And so they were able to use economic opportunity funds to create a nutrition program that would later on become what the federal government used as a prototype for the Women, Infants, and Children nutrition program, also known as WIC, that was created in 1972. And so you can see how economic opportunity became conjoined with a social welfare program. And so in New Orleans and across the South, these social programs, food stamps, healthcare, what we consider welfare programs, along with the activists who were within these organizations, they combined welfare rights, public health, and public housing movements. And they didn't see themselves as being separate from a larger trajectory of civil rights and economic opportunity, and also the larger, long-standing Black freedom movement. And so the crusade against hunger and malnutrition became central to this multi-layered activism and provoked extensive controversy about historical and contemporary meanings of race, health, and welfare in the United States. And so at the same time in Louisiana, from 1961 to 1967, national welfare rolls exploded. They went from 3.5 million people signed up for welfare to 11 million people. And in Louisiana, the Department of Public Welfare systematically reduced benefits to aid to families with dependent children. And so in 1962, amendments established that cash payments for welfare recipients would be calculated at the state level. However, Southern states consistently paid out the lowest amounts of cash payments to welfare recipients due to a long history of segregation, Jim Crow, and the welfare system being used to promote state violence. And so radicalized by these cuts and a longer tradition of organizing, a group of Black women established the New Orleans citywide welfare organization in the mid-1960s to fight the state on issues concerning adequate income, dignity, and decent paying jobs, and to inform all welfare recipients of their rights. These Black women, Eartha St. Anne, Shirley Lampton, Audrey DeClaire, Clementine Brumfield, and Monica Hunter utilized a combination of civil rights tactics like marches and sit-ins to political lobbying and judicial battles to help, with the help of the National Association of Social Workers and legal assistance. And so a primary target of their activism was the Housing Authority of New Orleans, with whom they battled with to lower rents in response to these systematic welfare cuts. And so here are a couple of newspaper articles that I found in an archive that kind of show the different ways that they protested these welfare cuts, both going to the state office building and then also marches. And so there's a really wonderful quote by Miss Shirley Lampton in which she's discussing that if a woman with 3 children receives $80 a month from cash assistance, and she has to pay a minimum amount of $16.75 for rent, keep in mind this is the 1960s, $16.75 for rent, this leaves a balance of $63 for the rest of the month to pay for food, insurance, clothing, and medical expenses. It's not a lot of money left. And so here is really where these ideas of welfare dependency come from. This is the reason why, there are all of these systematic state cuts. There's a narrative of poverty. There's a culture of poverty. So that's a sociological concept that suggests that poor people develop habits that they then pass down to their children, that their children then pass down to their children, that continues poverty. So it's a culture. It's a set of practices that poor people have. And so that's a narrative that was really popular at this time. And then that was combined with another term called the welfare queen, which is still used today in some instances, which is a negative term used to describe women who are seeming to take advantage of the welfare system. And so it's welfare as a way of life is what it's called. And so these women, it's like, they have kids to stay on welfare, but they're able to, buy seafood at the grocery store, that, those kinds of talking points were really, really popular in political circles, in social circles. But the reality of it is that these terms have been crafted on purpose and used by political actors to dehumanize poor Black people, primarily Black women and their children. And so the terms have been used to increase the criminalization of poor Black communities and is used as reasoning to cut social welfare benefits. And so some examples that we'll get into are the welfare reform of the 1980s under President Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton's, his signature line was that he was going to end welfare as we know it. And so these narratives surrounded a lot of debates over welfare and economic justice at the time. And so that's kind of where we still see some of these narratives today. And so that's what these women are fighting against. And so in 1971, our main actor, Miss Francois Washington, and her husband moved to New Orleans, Louisiana. And Miss Washington became well acquainted with the treatment of welfare recipients in Louisiana after divorcing her husband and needing help taking care of her son. Subpar treatment, stereotypes of Black welfare mothers, and inadequate housing were now her daily reality. She recalled that in Los Angeles, where she had previously lived, you received a check twice a month for food stamps and a cash allowance check once a month. In contrast, Louisiana did not have adequate childcare, welfare recipients could not go to college, and they received much less in cash assistance from the state in comparison. With costly insurance in New Orleans, many welfare recipients relied on social assistance to cover healthcare costs for themselves and their children. And according to Ms. Washington, the state perceived those applying for welfare as, quote, clients that wanted it for their little money, end quote, instead of thinking of them as receiving welfare to help feed their children, pay for healthcare, and to sustain themselves during a period of not being able to find suitable employment. And while considering getting a social work bachelor's degree, Ms. Washington also faced hurdles surrounding negative welfare rhetoric. The quote on the screen says, I mean, the books teach you how to really treat clients like they're dirty, you know? They on that side of the table and you're on this side and you have all the control. So I didn't like that about the work. And if I had not had that experience before going there, I wouldn't have noticed it. I would have just went right on and got my degree under those circumstances. And so she's really talking about how she doesn't like the way that even social workers are taught to treat welfare clients. And she wasn't alone. Other women in New Orleans had been feeling the same way for a long time. And so she faced this reality again and again of the people who controlled the state and local welfare policies, along with the case managers, were the same people who touted these myths surrounding the nature of what these welfare mothers should look like, what their home should look like, their behaviors, their bodies, and whether or not they were deserving of welfare. She preferred working for welfare justice rather than holding down a paying job that then would lead to her involvement in tenant organizing in her own apartment complex. So on October 19th, 1976, the tenants, including Ms. Washington of the Crescent Arms 3 apartments, planned to strike. Crescent Arms 3, located in the Tremaine neighborhood, was declared unsafe for human habitation due to gas and water being shut off due to unpaid bills, no external lighting, and faulty electrical wiring. Representatives of the citywide housing coalition, coordinated by organizer Jim Hayes and the Crescent Arms tenants, felt the only option was to withhold rent until the owners of the complex fixed the conditions. Over the next 2 years, the citywide housing coalition and tenants repeatedly showed up to protest City Hall and demand the mayor's attention on the matter. And as conditions continue to not improve for the residents of Crescent Arms, the housing coalition and 40 residents occupied City Hall for more than 4 hours to have their concerns heard. They refused to be deterred even as police arrived, with Jim Hayes saying, "We'll go to jail. It's probably safer than where we're staying right now." This intense community and political pressure from the mayor, tenants, and the housing coalition eventually resulted in repairs in 1978. And Miss Viola Washington would then become the president of the Tenants Association, which would also receive 4% of rent to maintain cooperation and to work with tenants so the complex could maintain livable conditions. This win was the result of militant grassroots activists, anti-poverty workers, and the poor Black women who were welfare recipients who lived in the Crescent Arms 3, who saw a role in the decision-making process about their own complex. Ms. Washington and many others continued organizing in the grassroots. In 1980, Ms. Washington started what was then known as the Welfare Rights Assistance Program and aired a message of Black-led welfare education and know your rights information on local TV. Using a vast network of other Black women leaders and anti-poverty activists, the eventual New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization continued to make welfare an important political issue in the Crescent City. To protest Ronald Reagan's foreign and domestic economic policies, including proposed cuts to vital social welfare services, 300 people and 45 diverse organizations, including the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization, chanted outside of City Hall, saying, "Reagan, Reagan, it's a shame, poor folks suffer, and you're the blame." As these new laws were being passed that continued to give the state more and more control, while also there was a decrease in federal funding for welfare, Louisiana began incorporating workfare programs. So these workfare programs were essentially, they mandated work for welfare recipients. And so that they required women on welfare with children over the age of 3 to find work and enroll in a training program. And so a quarter of Louisiana's 274,000 welfare recipients lived in Orleans Parish, which allowed for a community organizer to be in the decision-making room. The community advocate and organization that was recommended to the mayor was Miss Washington and the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization. And so in this room, Miss Washington was able to advocate for those on welfare, saying, quote, "They are tired of the programs that keep coming through that don't bring jobs," end quote. Miss Washington capitalized on her knowledge and experience as a welfare recipient and the executive director of this organization while she was on this city board of welfare. She served as a community advocate on this board from 1992 to 1996. In this space, a very real question of if available jobs would pay a competitive wage, that there was a very real question in these rooms of if the jobs that they were bringing in would actually pay, enough for people to sustain themselves to actually then get them off of welfare. Ms. Washington herself felt adamantly that, quote, "If the intent is really what they say it is, to get me off welfare, the only way to do that is if I'm educated. If I don't have a high school diploma, I will still have to depend on some part of welfare, so you have not helped me," end quote. Though not all of her suggestions were taken up by the city, they were able to gain control of an important piece of this new welfare rollout. And so the result of her work on this board was the And Still I Rise program. Now, this was a 5-week program in which the first 3 weeks focused on self-esteem and motivation, and the last 2 weeks connected students with resources to improve their education and secure actual job opportunities. And so the program welcomed its first class in January of 1990, and the 5-week sessions included speakers from across the community who had ties to organizing, education, policy, or cultural organizations. And so almost all of the welfare recipients who attended this And Still I Rise program were Black mothers. And a large part of the programming strived to connect them with the Black community in the Treme. Cookouts, music, art festivals, and fundraising drives helped keep the women and the welfare organization connected to the community in which they belonged. And so other community organizations would speak to these classes, including worker justice advocates, university professors, social justice activists, and Black art centers. Along with appearing on TV to discuss Louisiana's welfare system, Ms. Washington used every opportunity she could to build up community support, funds, and education past what the state had allocated for this program. And so Ms. Washington also felt very adamantly about uplifting the Black women that attended this program. Now, her version of uplift and motivation centered on Black history, giving students resources for when the state removed them from the welfare rolls, and connected welfare recipients with other community organizations for reciprocal support. And so she also focused heavily on educational opportunities, getting these women access to take their GED, to open up other pathways for work that could pay more than a minimum wage and offer the health and childcare that they would need. And so she worked tirelessly to make sure that the education program and training resources were steeped in Black history in order to combat racist and dehumanizing narratives of Black women, Black women's labor, motherhood, and community that many of the women who were in this program had faced. And so this Black history aided in the racial uplift of Black women and mothers, connecting them to a longer organizing history of poverty activists and an understanding of systemic factors that influence these women's everyday conditions. And so the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization and Miss Washington's educational strategy utilized an ancillary rise built on Black women's empowerment, supporting education and community organizing. And so this classroom structure is based on this word, communiversity. And so as Ms. Washington explained it to me, communiversity in the New Orleans context is a way of teaching an educational program by inviting community members, students, and scholars to learn and organize against their issues together. And so communiversities helped build lasting partnerships, coalitions, and educational opportunities that helped build Black mothers up culturally to help sustain themselves in their long battle with the state. And this had a powerful influence on the building of self-esteem and the reaffirmation of Black personhood for these welfare students. And so the welfare communiversity knowledge sharing in and outside of a traditional classroom setting provided a safe space for Black women on welfare to engage in placemaking and accessing the public knowledge about welfare policies that impacted their lives. And so many of the women who attended the program had been unable to attend their high school graduation. So once they completed the program, they participated in a ceremony in which they walked across the stage and received a certificate of completion. And so this certificate not only put them in compliance with the state, as welfare recipients, but it represented the holistic communiversity welfare education and Black history that they had learned along the way, along with their new connections to local resources and activists. And so the And Still I Rise program ran from 1990 to 1996. And at the program's close, they had worked with over approximately 10,000 welfare mothers. And so despite pushback from those who had experiential knowledge in understanding how these welfare reform bills were actually very restrictive, state legislators and local neighborhoods worked double time to continue the harmful persecution of welfare recipients. But the And Still I Rise program still worked they still worked tirelessly to close poverty gaps for welfare recipients, and the important work that went into empowering one's sense of space and place, regardless of their welfare status, continued. And so the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, it's a lot, of 1996 was passed by President Bill Clinton to, quote, end welfare as we know it. And so this bill fundamentally shaped the welfare system that we have today. And so this introduced federal mandatory work requirements and lifetime limits on welfare, so how long you can be on it. And then this also enhanced the enforcement of child support through garnishing wages and also jail time. And then it also gave states more control over welfare funds through block grants. It imposed stricter conditions to meet in order to be food stamp eligible. And so at this time, due to this act, there was a 56% reduction in welfare caseloads. But there was only a 1% reduction in poverty. And so a lot of people felt that this workfare is not fair and it's not work. As a lot of people were unable to actually escape poverty after being kicked off of the welfare rolls. And so this is a dynamic history full of Black women leaders, organizers, and mothers who fought to carve out space for themselves in their communities despite restrictive legislation and racial rhetoric. And so the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization inherited an organizing tradition that was rooted in the 1960s and 70s fight for civil rights and Black economic justice. On the ground, Black welfare women continued innovating previous strategies to suit the times. A holistic approach to welfare education that centered Black history did more for helping these welfare mothers achieve motivation and actual stable job employment than a simple welfare to workfare program. Relying on a diverse array of community coalitions helped keep their base strong and keep them in conversation with local politicians, reclaiming poverty as not a moral failure, but a policy failure. This aided in asserting that the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization and Black welfare women were also citizens that were deserving of care and political power. And so I also want to leave you with my last main idea, which is that community building itself is also a historical process. And so I would not be up here right now if it wasn't for the community building of my mother and my grandmother, but also of the women that I met in New Orleans who connected me to more women to then hear their stories and to talk with them. And so I also want you to think about how oral history is a really important tool for historical research, but also understanding your own history. And so this allows me to tell not a declining narrative of welfare rights, but to present Miss Washington's interview and also the New Orleans Welfare Rights Organization and Still I Rise program as a smaller success story. Thank you.
Let's see, this is working. Okay. Thank you very much, Lorraine. Really appreciate that. Can you advance the slide one more? We have a survey of our events that you could fill out to let us know what you think. But I thought what we do now is go ahead and open this up to question and answers. And what I can do is with this mic, I can kind of just move around, you can raise your hand, I can kind of move around, and you can ask a question. Or does anybody have a question off the top of your head? Anybody want to ask a question? There's some two people over here. It's you first, and
Do you know, or we can find more instances, like broadcasts and stuff of this girl speaking?
So I was able to find one instance of her speaking. If I can go back to the slide, apologies. This picture of her right here is from a Louisiana public broadcast. And so there's the Louisiana Digital, I think it's like the Digital Public Library, where they have a lot of the public broadcasting. And so I was able to search her name, search, the date and welfare reform in order to listen to her give this talk. And then I was able to show her this picture to then ask her, hey, do you remember doing this? To then get a little bit more information. But Georgia also has a digital public library. And so you're also able to look up, what people were talking about during this time, see those debates happen. Yeah. That's all.
I'm there. I just want to say, I'm also from Louisiana.
Oh, wow.
First question is, what was your favorite dish over there?
Okay.
I'm always curious.
Yeah. My favorite dish. Okay.
So,
That is hard. That is really hard. The shrimp etouffee, that was really good. I think that was really good. But a po' boy. A po' boy is, in my opinion, a sandwich, but it is so different. It is so different. A Louisiana catfish fried po' boy, best thing.
actually, glad that you said that. Actually, is a decent polo shop, there on Claremont.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, they also serve some mean bread pudding. I mean, it's good. They got fried boudin balls too.
Okay.
Let's see what else they got. They also got some crawfish pies over there. Good too. But, second question, this thing has to do with community. You mentioned it's communities also work with, proactivism. My main question is, if you're going out to create a community, how would you do it personally?
So that's an interesting question because I felt like that's exactly what I had to do. There were times as a master's student, you know, you have certain times where you're free and you're like, this is my research time. And so my research time, instead of it being like at my laptop or going to like a library and going through like old boxes and stuff, I would go out to the Treme and I would, and you know, this, it's a little, you know, take this with a grain of salt, but like going to the community bookstore, I would go to, there's a community center that's there, and I would talk to people. I would ask them, like, you know, people love telling you about like where they're from, how they got here, who they know. And if you're, you know, I'm there, I'm like, oh, you know, hi, my name's Erlene, I'm from North Carolina, I'm here getting my master's, I'm doing history about anti-poverty. You know, do you want to talk to me? Can I ask you a couple of questions? And so in that way, I was able to like meet so many people that I wouldn't have met. And like a woman that I met who told me a lot about the planter that Miss Viola's face was on, you know, she took me to lunch. We got fried fish at a local place. And, you know, like I met a lot of her friends and, you know, she brought me, we got drinks. Like, you know, it's like, I think that's what I mean by community building is also a historical process and a part of historical research. And that if you want to do oral history and you're, you know, speaking to these people, you really do need to build a relationship with them. And you need to spend time with people as the same thing you do when you're building community with your friends, right? So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You said both your mother and grandmother were part of organizations, correct?
My mother and grandmother were both domestic workers. But my grandmother, Bernice Jones, was the Davenport NCAA president, Davenport, Iowa, NCAA president. So she had started doing domestic work and then eventually did like factory work. And then she did that kind of community like organizing later on in life.
Do you believe that that influenced you to become, like interested in activism and organization, or was that something that you discovered on your own?
So it was something that I discovered like after the fact. So my grandmother passed when I was younger. I really can't remember, like maybe about 13 maybe. And so I didn't really have like a close relationship with her. And so most of what I know about her and her life comes from my mom and my older cousins, and my older siblings. And so as I've been, you know, I'm the first in my family to get my bachelor's degree. And so I've got my master's degree and then also the first in my immediate family of my siblings. And so the more that I've like done education and the more that I've been like, you know, doing historical research, I go home and I like tell them like, oh, this is what I'm talking about. And they're like, oh, didn't you know that, you know, Grandma Jones used to do this and that? And I'm like, no, I didn't know that. So I've learned, and even about my own mother, I've learned a lot of that after the fact. Yeah.
Thank you.
How are you?
Thank
I'm
you.
very proud of you. That's
Thank you.
you need to keep growing in the system. Basically, I guess I want to ask you, it's weird, I have a child born in 92 and in 96. I was a young mother, a teenage mother, and I was on the welfare system. However, I can say that I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, so I come from Commonwealth State. And it seems to me that there were more restrictions in the South, and they didn't get as much benefits. Based on the information that I'm reading, they were deprived of more benefits in the South. Because in those years, in 92 through 96, when I was on the welfare system coming from a Commonwealth state, I got an abundance of support as a young mother. I'm talking from daycare to transportation to bus passes, all that. And I believe that in the South, when it comes to the welfare system, that they don't get the same type of benefits. I think even though we know that the legislature, the government handles everything, but when it comes down to certain restrictions, when we're talking about the mayor, what they fight for, people that are directly there, the senators and so forth, I think that in the north, especially in Commonwealth states, that they receive more of that Commonwealth support, shall I say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we need to fight harder in the South when it comes down to the welfare system for the benefits of people.
I love that you brought that up because, you know, there was a lot of really important welfare rights activism that happened in the North in the mid to late 60s.
My mother was on some of the marches.
Yeah, exactly. And so there was, and you know, this is connected to that, even though it's a little bit later and in the South, that I couldn't talk about. But there was a lot of that organizing that happened that then allowed for, you know, these states to then, because the federal government essentially gave the states a lot more control. And so in the South, these, the cash assistance that was doled out was already more restrictive. And then it kind of gets worse due to legislation. And so what I wanted to show with this is that, you know, the South has also been a really important hotbed of organizing despite how bad things have been, are, depending on how you think about it. And so there has always been organizing happening, even at a moment like this of really restrictive, dehumanizing welfare reform. And so if these women could do it and you know, they didn't necessarily win. They didn't get the state Louisiana to change their laws, but they were able to make meaning and help people where they could. And I think that that's a really important message, especially in the South.
Yeah.
We have a question.
Yeah.
The question is, I'm wondering if this Washington and government had to contend with the Reagan reform rhetoric that was also going on at this time, and if so, how they did so. I recall playing a role in anti-welfare, remember playing a role in anti-welfare narratives.
Yes. So back to this like narrative and reality, the criminalization of poor Black communities and the cut of social welfare programs go hand in hand. So Reagan's, Nixon and then Reagan's war on drugs is also really, really steeped within this. At a certain point in the 90s, I don't remember because I don't have it in front of me, but a part of this welfare reform was that they were going to kick who they saw as drug addicts off of welfare, right? People who are on welfare, using it for healthcare to get help for their substance use. And so Miss Washington actually has a really, really great quote where she says, we're given, I really don't remember the amount, but she says, we're given $100 a month. And then after certain things, you can't buy a lot of drugs with that, is essentially what she said. And it's this, and I think that that's one, really funny that she put that in the newspaper, but also this aspect of like, these are people who are in need of help, regardless of if you agree with their decisions or not, right? And so trying to kick people off because of their situation does not then improve that situation, if that makes sense. And so she was actively fighting against also this drug war rhetoric. And she was like, that just doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
I have a question myself, and this pertains to one of the great and its long-standing tenacious myths in this country is that it's primarily persons of color that are on the welfare system. I'm curious if you found yet in the literature that you've been reading and researching what, say, Appalachian communities where white, that's where a great deal of welfare recipients live in the Appalachian regions, or in the rural South or the rural Midwest, high propensity or poor white immigrants. If you found organizing that was somewhat similar to what you're seeing there?
Yes, so there's a really great book by Jesse Wilkerson who discusses white women in Appalachia organizing around welfare rights. And obviously, you know, the set of social kind of rhetoric and things that they're dealing with is a little bit different. A lot of these women, it's really honestly a labor story where it's, you know, their husbands or, you know, have been laid off or, you know, kind of disregarded by these company towns that, you know, sprung up all across the mountains. And so they were kind of dealing with welfare in different ways. That's a really good book. But then when it comes to the rural South, Greta Jeong, and that's where I got that quote from. She has a book called "You Can't Eat Freedom," and it's about white and black interracial organizing, particularly in the Mississippi Delta and Arkansas Delta, around kind of economic opportunity and the war on poverty. And during that time, during Lyndon B. Johnson's war on poverty, there's this shift of there's a push in which, because of the way welfare and poverty become racialized to mean black or brown, that then deters white people from accessing benefits. We have this, it's also a part of like kind of that American individualistic kind of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps narrative that becomes really popular at this time because of the fact that white people as sort of like, you know, to say where they stand in terms of, you know, opposing the Civil Rights Act, they're going to not use federal funds. So it's a really interesting history. But yeah, there's a lot of really great work on that. Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem. Thank you.
So I guess as we were going through the whole research process,
Mhm.
I didn't know any of this, right, obviously. But as we were going through and kind of seeing the progress that these women have made, I guess how did it feel? Also seeing how it kind of got
Yeah.
taken off.
Yeah.
As time kind of passed on.
Yeah.
Usual story.
Yeah.
Like, I guess how was that like meeting the people who made the change and then comparing that to how even still now black women are still welfare and like you said, it's not even them who are all in the mix. So what's that like? I guess.
So I mentioned how, you know, I became interested in domestic workers because what I learned about my family, but I was on food stamps as a kid, and you know, I had government health care, and I had my own experiences of even in high school, you know, the first time I'm sitting down in a history class, and it's like hearing these like negative narratives over and over and over again. And I kind of, once I really like put the pieces together in terms of how all of these things connected, and that's when I really decided to go forward with this idea, is because I was sick of hearing it, to be honest, personally. And so I was like, you know, I was a labor organizer with Starbucks because I was a barista, and it was always like, oh, you know, you're young and you have a cushy job. And it's like, no, I'm young and I'm working this job that hurts my back because I need to pay for school. So I also deserve the same rights as other people who are working these like manufacturing jobs, right? And so that's why I think we should have a union. And so I feel the same way about anti-poverty work, in that poverty still exists, and I have experienced that. And there are solutions, right? And even though things feel like they've gotten so much worse, I think even here today, what we're doing together, right, is an important step in trying to make change. So, yeah.
With university.
Yeah, the community. Yeah.
Question.
Sorry, this is not really, but I just want to say that you are a very good public speaker. I just wanted to know, like, where do you get your, like, motivation for, like, who inspires you? Because I know there are people out there that see messages, like, even for similar.
My motivations are that I hate money and right, and my cat, and that I don't want to be doing anything else other than this. This is exactly what I want to be doing. And so I've worked a lot of different jobs, and they all really suck. And so this is, I care about this a lot, and it speaks to me, it speaks to my friends, it speaks to my community. And I want to be useful. I want to be useful. So, this is how I've figured out that, in cooking is how I figured out how to be useful to my community. So, that's kind of what keeps me going. Yeah.
Hey, how
How are you?
I'm good. First, thank you for bringing the information to us. It was very informative, and I really appreciate that. Also, I just wanted to know, like, after doing all of the research that you did it bring about a passion or maybe an idea for an organization that you want to put forward in some way or in some way in this type of work?
No. And I'm gonna say no because you know, being a history major for a long time, a lot of people are like, you should become a politician or you should become a lawyer. And I'm like, that's not for me, you know? That's not for me. That's not really the kind of work I want to do. And I think in terms of like an organization, I don't think that my job here is to start another organization. I think my job is to connect people to the ones that exist currently. So like the National Domestic Workers Union is really important, and is doing really important work right now when it comes to low wage care work. Thinking about the healthcare workers right now who are organizing into unions. A lot of nurses, including people in my own family, are Black and brown women and immigrant women. And so thinking about service work organizers, people who are trying to organize unions at Dollar Trees, Dollar Generals, coffee shops, restaurants, like, so I pour a lot of my other, you know, time into being a organizer for United Campus Workers, which does like higher ed unions. And so there are a lot of really great organizations that are out there who I think speak to this work. And so it's like I want to kind of funnel instead of kind of trying to make my own thing. I'm not really good at that. So yeah.
Thank you. My question was, what interaction or piece of advice did you receive while speaking with women who spoke to and Little Washington? What piece of advice and interaction has stuck with you most?
I think one of the women I talked to, the one I got a fish fry plate with her, Miss Sherry, she, you know, speaking to like older people, they obviously have a lot of questions for me and about my generation. And they're like, what's going on with y'all, right? And I think for them, it really like clicked to me because it feels like hurtful. Like you don't think we're doing anything, you know, like stuff isn't easy for us either, you know, kind of thing. So it's like, oh, y'all are always in your phones and that kind of stuff, right? But I thought it was really important like sitting down with her, having a conversation, having a meal, and being able to tell her, like, no, this is what young people are dealing with today. We can't pay rent. We can't, like, it's difficult to afford groceries. We're trying to get an education because that's the only way we can get a job that like pays enough to pay that expensive rent, you know? And so a lot of people, and in talking to her and in thinking about it, I was also able to hear from her perspective that like a lot of them are like, even though they're older, like they're worried for where things are going. And they're worried about us. Even though they show it in ways that sometimes can be a little like, you know, annoying. It's like they are worried about us. And so being able to have that like intergenerational types of conversations where like, you know, it felt like people were actually listening. And then also it made me realize that like, oh, that's why like money is seemingly so important to people in my generation. Like everybody's trying to hustle and hustle and hustle and make that money because we feel like that's the only thing we can do. It's not, I want to say that, but yeah.
Thank you for coming out today. I really enjoyed your presentation. Now, my question is, do you think that social welfare benefits has any correlation with medical price gouging?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm gonna maybe talk about some of this in my dissertation that I have to write in 4 years. But yes, the answer is yes. The way that I can explain it is that how federal Medicaid and Medicare work are that healthcare companies and hospitals get subsidies from the government to receive Medicaid and Medicare patients. And so that's like good for them because they're kind of like able to make money where they would be losing money taking people who like pay less, right, than private insurance. And so there is a certain type of business relationship that exists. And if the prices go up, then they can, if they make the prices go up, then they can charge more and they can get more in subsidies. That's, you know, that's a really quick way of explaining it, but the short answer is yes.
My question is, so right now, following along with the news, especially how it's to us, constantly, I feel like it can be very easy sometimes to slip into this kind of mindset of like, we might be doomed, right? And like you and that's not the case, but how would you I guess that mindset, like what are some ways that we can combat that mentality and also some ways that we can potentially get involved?
I think the way to combat that is by getting involved. And the best way to do that is to have a conversation with yourself about how you think you should get involved. So like, I know like it's hard for me to stand for a long time. I did a lot of striking and picketing and marching when I was, you know, 18, 19, 20. I'm now 23 and I'm already tired. You know what I mean? And so it's like, if you have that energy to be outside, be outside. If you don't have that energy, do you have a skill? Can you fix cars? Can you sew? Can you cook? Do you read a lot of books about these different topics? Is there a way that you can share those books with other people? Is there a way you can summarize those books for other people? I think people view community almost as just this, or like getting involved as just this like transaction, but it's really easy. It's really easy. Once you free yourself from like, it has to look a certain type of way, it has to, you know, be a certain type of way. You have to decide how you want to get involved and also understand you can't do everything under the sun. You also have goals that you want to achieve, other things outside of like trying to fight what feels like the end of the world, you know? And so also, I mean, as a history major, like that's what helps me is that I'm constantly having to read stories about the conditions that other people were in across the world that also felt like the end of the world, right? But we kept going. So that's what I'd say.
So we maybe got time for one more question. I apologize. We have to call the university to a close here in just a second. We got another presentation coming in shortly after this, but we got time for one more question. And also, I know folks are leaving because we've got another class. If you're leaving, there's some snacks out there as well, and don't forget to sign the rolls as well to let folks know, let us know you were here. And here's our last.
Hi, thank you so much for presenting. Really appreciate it. If you wanted to learn more, do you have any like book recommendations?
Oh, yes. I have so many. Oh, I have so many. Storming Caesar's Palace by Annalise Orlac. There's a book and a PBS documentary. The PBS, they have, if you look up Storming Caesar's Palace PBS, there's like short clips that also have like explanations and like more information. And so it's a similar story of like war on poverty, welfare, organizing, but in Las Vegas. And also what is very interesting about the women in that organized in Las Vegas is that a lot of them were from the Mississippi Delta. So that's like, I'd say that's like number one. Go read that, go watch that. Yeah. Awesome.
Real quick, we have just something I would like to present to Earlene. We have a certificate, basically of appreciation for Earlene coming and spending so much time with us and introducing us to the community. I love that word. I think that's my new word. I like all my classes to be a community class. But Earlene, thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming.
Oh, and let us know what you think of this. If you can, take just a few minutes. We have just at the very end here. Let me go to the end. We have a little QR code. You can let us know what you think of the Bennekin and this presentation in particular.